No. My sermon's over there. Okay, I'm going to wing it. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. You may be seated. It's going to be a new experience for us all. You're not recording this, are you? Okay. Great. Well, those of you who know this already, we actually just got back from a trip to Mexico. This was sort of a quick little trip that Jessica and I took. The kids were at church camp this past week. And those of you who know anything about traveling, specifically international traveling, you know that it can be a very stressful ordeal. We actually traveled out on Monday with not too much fanfare. We left, we flew to Dallas. We got delayed for about 5 hours. Half of that was us sitting on the runway before we finally made it out of the country to Baja, California, the southern part of Baja, California. Traveling is stressful. One of the book of essays I read by a guy named David Sedaris, he wrote about traveling, his experience of traveling, and he had a flight attendant friend of his. And the flight attendant friend was just talking about how frustrating it can be to deal with people. People are not always nice when they're stressed out. So she went on and on about how terrible people can be to her, and she's just trying to do her job. Just trying to serve, move up and down the aisles without falling over or dumping her cart. And he said to her, do you ever just want to get back at these people? Do you ever just want to say something really nasty? And she said, well, I'll tell you a secret. She said, at the very end of the flight, notice what the flight attendant does. And you'll know how we deal with our stress with people. And he said, okay. So next time he flew, got on the plane, and of course, the flight attendant just kind of seemed a little stressed out. And at the very end of the flight, right before they landed, he paid attention. And sure enough, the flight attendant moved up and down the road at the very end, the bag in her hand. She was saying, "You're trash. You're trash. Your family's trash. You're trash." And he said, "Oh, I get it now. I understand how they blow off steam." It was interesting as we were moving back into our attempt to get back into the country. I almost became a Mexican citizen. We were in the airport in Cabo, and sitting there at the front desk with the Mexican TSA agent, and he said, "Do you have the other half of your customs declaration form?" And I said, "My what?" And he said, "When you came into the country, you got a form and you filled it out at the top and you filled out the bottom. They tore off the bottom and gave it to you. I need that form back, please." And I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And of course, my wife pulls out of her purse, "Yo, you mean this one, the one that I have?" And if you know anything about the difference between our personalities, I am the administrative one. I'm the spreadsheet guy. I'm the organized one. She maybe not so much. So it was a great moment for her to know that she had this piece of paper, and I did not. So lo and behold, I had to go to the Mexican TSA agents. He told me that to replace this form, the fine for not having this form was going to be 558 pesos. I said, "Oh, how am I going to come up with that?" And I said, "Well, how much is that in U.S.?" He said, "It's about $30." Okay, just relief. So we finally got out of the country, we made it back, and it's just such a relief to not be traveling anymore. You see, in our gospel reading this morning, the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is doing a little bit of traveling. And him and his disciples are making their way to Jerusalem, but first they have to pass through this Samaritan village. And those of you who have been in church for a little while typically know that there's, at this time some animosity between the Jews and the Samaritans. But most people don't really know why. Why was there such animosity between these two groups? Well, there's a number of reasons, but chief of which was something that the Jews did to the Samaritans a little while back. The Samaritans were descendants from the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, two of Joseph's sons. And they had a slightly different view of the Mosaic covenant, of how to worship, of how to follow the law, of who should be the priest and where the worship should happen. That's why we see in John's Gospel, in chapter 4 of John, when Jesus is interacting with the woman at the well, what are they talking about? She's asking about the proper place, the proper location where worship should be happening. The reason why that was kind of the chief thing on her mind is because the Samaritans had a very specific place in which they believed that God should be worshipped. They had their own temple in another city. It wasn't Jerusalem. They didn't believe that Jerusalem was the proper place. They believed it was in Samaria. Well, about 100 years before Christ, a Jewish leader by the name of John Hyrcanus rose to power. He invaded Samaria, devastated the land, destroyed the temple, and then forced many, many Samaritans to convert to his brand of Judaism. So we always think about the negative view of the Jews towards the Samaritans, but few of us really know the reason why the Samaritans had a very negative view of the Jews. There was some animosity that dated back years and years and years. So Jesus is moving through this Samaritan village, and it says they didn't receive him. Why didn't they receive him? Because he had his face set towards Jerusalem. Again, if you're a messianic figure, and you're a Samaritan, you hope that this Messiah figure is going to validate what you believe. That's not Jerusalem. That's not where the proper place of worship. It's here in Samaria. Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus has his face set towards Jerusalem. And what do? Shut their doors in his face. They don't receive. They pull the shades of their window. They don't want any part of it. The disciples are incredibly offended by this, and they're very quick to kind of, push the nuclear button option. Hey, let's just rain fire and brimstone down upon them and kill them all. How about that? Jesus said, that's not my purpose here. My purpose is not to destroy men's lives, but to save. To save. See, it's interesting because a lot of times the prejudices that we hold are things that we have to abandon in order to be true followers of Christ. That's what he's trying to convince the disciples of. You gotta let go of it. You have to let go of it in order to follow after me. What does he say later on? He says, you gotta be willing to leave your family behind. The guy says, well, let me bury my dad at least. Come on. He said, no. Let me go say, farewell to the company that's in my house. Jesus says, there's no time for that. You have to be willing to leave those things behind, whether it be connections or prejudices. You have to be willing to leave it behind. our Old Testament reading, we got the not only the very complicated names, the breakdown of the Hebrew names that I stumbled through, but we also get this beautiful story of the passing of the mantle. Literally, this is where the phrase comes from. The passing of the mantle from Elijah to Elisha. Elisha had to pick up where Elijah left off. He inherited something. Literally, Elijah's cloak was placed upon him. He inherited what came before. That is our story as well. We inherit the faith of our fathers and our mothers. We inherit that. And in order to really, truly embody it, we've got to be willing to let go of some things. What does Paul say? Paul says, you're not going to be defined as a Christian by your selfish ambition or by your contentions or your disagreements. That's not going to be what defines you. What's going to define you? Love, joy, peace. Those things, they don't make laws against, Paul said. Those are the things that define. That's part of the mantle that we inherit and what we take forward as believers. Let's close this week. Let's pray as we close. Well, Father, we're grateful for the faith of those who have come before us. The prophets and the disciples, the apostles, yes, but also our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our cousins, our ancestors, those who came before us, who passed down like a mantle the faith that we hold. Pray that we would be faithful to live into this, that we would be willing to give up whatever prejudice or past hurt, damaging relationships, unhealthy habits, whatever it is. Father, I pray that we would be willing to let it all fall away. Meet us at the table, O Lord, in the breaking of the bread. Pray all this in the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.